On the 19th of November, the Soviets launched one of the most awesome counterattacks in modern history. Field guns, mortars and rockets began a ferocious bombardment 75 miles to the west of Stalingrad. It was the earth-pounding product of 2 months' secret planning. For 80 minutes, artillery thundered. Then, at 8:40 a.m., they suddenly fell silent.
Just minutes later, wave upon wave of Soviet tanks broke out from beneath their camouflage. The key phase of the Soviet battle plan was now underway. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops and thousands of tanks had been hidden in the countryside around Stalingrad, and now they were on the attack. The weather was appalling. Snow and freezing fog made it almost impossible to see where they were going. Urged on by their commanders, the troops surged forward. Infantrymen carrying their rifles ran alongside the tank, and some even hitched a ride. They clung on the back up here as the tank plunged through gullies and banks of snow. These men were leading a great Soviet comeback, thrusting deep into enemy-held territory.
Paulus got the news at his headquarters here. This is it on our map case, right here. The German front line ran from down here through Stalingrad in front of Paulus and right the way back to his rear. It was here in the north that the Soviets had mustered a massive force which had broken through behind Paulus. There was even worse news to come. Just 24 hours later, more Soviet tanks broke through the front line in the south and headed north to link up with the others. Soviet forces were closing like huge jaws around Paulus and his entire 6th Army. On the 24th of November, the jaws closed near the town of Kalach. The terrible reality dawned on Paulus. As many as 300,000 men in Stalingrad and the surrounding countryside were trapped in an area that became known as the Kessel, the German word for cauldron.
The Soviet troops were jubilant. They had outwitted and outmaneuvered the Germans. Just 5 days before, the Soviets had been on the brink of defeat in Stalingrad.
Paulus was stunned. No one had believed the Soviets had the strength to mount such a massive operation. Paulus asked Hitler permission to withdraw from Stalingrad and to punch a hole in the ring of Soviet troops surrounding him. But just like Stalin 4 months earlier, Hitler told his troops there was no question of their being allowed to withdraw from Stalingrad. Hitler ordered his troops inside the Kessel to continue fighting, while he prepared 2 tank divisions to break through the encirclement from the outside. But it would take weeks for the forces to get into position and ready for the assault. Inside the Kessel, cut off from their supply lines, conditions for the trapped German troops were deteriorating rapidly.
Food, fuel and ammunition were all running out. To make matters worse, many of the German soldiers had never received their winter uniforms. There was little they could do except huddle together in whatever shelter they could find.
Hitler's decision to leave his army trapped inside the Kessel was an enormous gamble. He believed he would be able to keep them fighting with the support of an airlift. Flying supplies into airfields in the Kessel was a huge undertaking. There were 300,000 troops trapped around here, and Hitler's staff calculated that it would require 800 cargo planes flying night and day. It was an extraordinarily ambitious plan, but the head of the German Air Force, the bombastic Hermann Göring, convinced Hitler that it would work. To succeed, they would need to land here at airfields in the Kessel an absolute minimum of 300 tons of supplies every single day. But they had made some fatal miscalculations. Within days of the airlift starting, it became clear that Hitler and Goering had massively overestimated the capacity of their air force to supply the Sixth Army. A combination of Soviet fighter aircraft and appalling weather meant that on average only 120 tons of supply reached the Kessel each day, less than half of what was required.
We have no winter clothes. We have been swindled and have been condemned to death. We shall die of the war or the frost.
Inside Stalingrad, the fighting continued, and the Soviets unleashed a new kind of assault. Day and night, loudspeakers throughout the Kessel broadcast propaganda messages in German. They called Stalingrad a mass grave and urged German soldiers to surrender.
I can tell you that it's terrible to sit in this trap. In the dugouts, it's dark. And outside, the temperature is minus 20 or 30. I can only say that if it wasn't for our strength of will and our inspiration in the fight for Germany, the whole business would have been broken long ago.
Despite the psychological battering, the frostbite and the starvation, most German troops still refused to surrender. Some feared that they'd be tortured or shot by their Russian captors, but most simply refused to believe that Hitler would abandon them. Then, at long last, a rumour went round that salvation was on the way.
2 German tank divisions, backed up by infantry and aircraft of the Luftwaffe, were on the way towards their colleagues trapped in the Kessel. Leading the attack was one of Hitler's most successful commanders. His name was Field Marshal Erich von Manstein. He had masterminded Germany's whirlwind victory in France, and now he was leading the mission to rescue the Sixth Army. With the airlift failing, everybody realized that this was the last chance for the starving troops. Manstein's tanks had to break through the front line, which was now down here, and then fight their way across the Soviet-controlled territory surrounding the Sixth Army. The German troops surged forwards towards their stranded colleagues, but within days, the Red Army intercepted the German advance 30 miles short of the trapped Sixth Army. The Soviet defenses had formed an impenetrable barrier, and Manstein's rescue attempt could advance no further. But on the 20th of December, the news got even worse. Manstein heard that the Soviets had launched a new offensive way off to the west, which threatened to cut off all the German forces in southern Russia. He had no choice but to veer off to deal with this new threat and abandon his attempt to break through to Paulus. With Manstein's departure went the last hope of the Sixth Army.
The Russian radio has announced the defeat of Manstein. Ahead of us is either death or captivity.